hemispheres. Sulci are the fissures that separate the gyri. Okay. Any doubt? Simple, basic. All of this we know. Yes. Now, if I have to study how the cerebral hemisphere actually look, I'm dividing it into three different, areas. First is the superolateral surface. Second is the inferior surface. Third is the medial surface. Suppose if I'm holding the brain like this, one is the superolateral surface. Correct? If I'm holding the brain like this, one is the superolateral surface, one is the inferior surface, one is the medial surface. Okay? This is how I'm dividing the brain into. Now, cerebral hemispheres are divided into lobes by central, parieto-occipital, lateral, and calcarine sulci. So, as we studied earlier, sulci are the ones that separate the gyrus. Correct? Now, these sulci, central, parieto-occipital, lateral, and the calcarine sulci, they divide the cerebral hemisphere into different lobes. Now, what are the different lobes? I have frontal lobe, parietal, temporal, and occipital. We name them so because of their relation to the cranial bones which they are under. Okay. Yes. Now look at this, guys. So this is the fissure that I'm talking about, right? Here we have, in between them, we have the corpus callosum. This is the longitudinal fissure. This is the frontal lobe. This is the parietal lobe. This is the occipital lobe. Here I'm seeing the brain from the inferior view. Okay. Now this is the central sulcus that is separating frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, right? Next, this is the occipital lobe that we have. Now look at this. This shows the superolateral surface of the brain. Okay, superior lateral surface of the brain. Here I have the central sulcus, which is separating frontal from the parietal lobe, right? Then we have the temporal lobe, which is separated by the lateral cerebral sulcus. This is the temporal lobe, right? This is the parietal lobe, right? And this part is the occipital lobe, and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus. And here you can see the cerebellum. All right. So very simple, guys. Basically, the brain is divided into three different lobes by these fissures I have. Okay. Now, this is just another diagram showing different lobes of brain without any colors. Without any colors. Okay. You can clearly see over here the lateral sulcus that divides the temporal lobe. Okay. Yes. What is the main sulcus? What is the main sulcus that is important to us? It is the reference sulcus that I have is the central sulcus. Central sulcus is an indent in the superomedial border of the hemisphere, 1 centimeter behind the midpoint. Although the name is central sulcus, but it is 1 centimeter behind the midpoint. It runs downward, forward, and towards the lateral sulcus across the lateral aspect. Central sulcus is the only sulcus that indents in the superomedial border. Okay, this portion is the central sulcus. As you can see how it is running towards the lateral sulcus. Correct? The one that I've drawn over here, this is the lateral sulcus and this is the central sulcus. As you can clearly see, it is not in the midline. Rather, it is 1 centimeter behind the midline. Understanding? So, the one that is next to it becomes the post-central sulcus. Post-central sulcus. So between them, what do I have? Post-central gyrus. So gyri is the fold between the two sulci. Understanding? Yes. Next, we have one more main sulcus, which is the lateral sulcus, which is present in deep cleft on the inferior and the lateral surfaces. It consists of the short stem and 3 rami. Then we have the parieto-occipital sulci, which is separating the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. Next, in the superolateral surface, we have the frontal lobe. Okay, frontal lobe is anterior to the central sulcus and superior to the lateral sulcus. Again, come back to this diagram. So I always keep saying central sulcus is my reference point. Anything that is anterior to this, this area is my frontal lobe. This area is the frontal lobe, right? Now, Superolateral surface of the frontal lobe is divided by 3 sulci into 4 gyrus. One is the precentral, superior and inferior frontal sulci, superior middle and inferior frontal gyri. So all of this is very important. We'll study why. Okay. Now here I have just another picture. Now look at this, guys. So always mark the central sulcus. So if this is somewhere the center, okay, if this is the center, 1 centimeter behind to that will be the central sulcus. So you can clearly see this is the central sulcus which is running towards the lateral sulcus. Anterior to that is my frontal lobe. Okay, if this is the central sulcus, then the one which is anterior to that will be precentral sulcus. Correct? The one that is anterior to that will be the precentral sulcus, and the one that is between the central sulcus and the precentral sulcus will be my precentral gyrus. That will be my precentral gyrus, which is very important for us. We'll see later how. Okay. Similarly, we have different gyri. Like there is one more, which is my inferior frontal gyrus. This is the inferior frontal sulcus which is separating it, and this is the precentral gyrus, and this is the inferior frontal gyrus, and we also have a superior frontal gyrus and middle frontal gyrus. Simple, guys. How are we going to approach this? Again, just come back to this. First, we have marked the central sulcus. The next sulcus that I have next to the central sulcus will be the precentral sulcus. And here I have the lateral sulcus. The one that exists between the central sulcus and the precentral sulcus will be precentral gyrus. Here next to that I have superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus. So how many gyrus do I have here? One is the precentral gyrus. Another is the superior frontal gyrus. Next I have the inferior frontal gyrus. In the middle I have the middle frontal gyrus. And this is the central sulcus, which is your reference point. Okay? Understanding? Yes. Next, in the temporal lobe, inferior to lateral sulcus is what the temporal lobe is present, which I have already shown. I have 2 sulci and 3 gyri. The occipital lobe is a very small area behind the parieto-occipital sulcus. Okay. Next, let's come to the parietal lobe. Okay. Now, this is the, as I said, this is the temporal lobe, and this small portion that you can see over here, this is the occipital lobe, and this is the central sulcus, and rest everything, all this area becomes my parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is posterior to central sulcus and extends superior to lateral sulcus and extends up to the parieto-occipital sulcus. There also I have 2 sulcus and 3 gyri. Let's come to the cortical areas, which now it gets interesting. Okay, I always keep mentioning, guys, what is my reference line? It is the central sulcus. The one that is next to that is my frontal lobe. The one that is behind that is the parietal lobe. Behind parietal lobe, I have occipital lobe. And then inferior to this sylvian fissure, which is called the lateral sulcus, is what I have the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe. Okay. Yes. Now, frontal lobe, what are the different cortical regions? Now, guys, I have a very small brain. Okay, the brain is hardly 1.5 kilograms maximum. It's as small as, I can just hold it in my hands. It is that small, very spongy organ. If you have dissected brain in your classes, when they let you hold the brain, you can see how spongy it is. Oh, mushy the brain is. It is that small, but it controls such a big human body. It controls such a big human body. Head is only this much. The rest, everything, hands, legs, abdomen, thorax, everything is controlled. How does it happen? How does it happen? It happens because every bit of my human body is actually represented in the cerebral cortex. It actually is represented in the cerebral cortex. Suppose I have pain, or I'm touching some hot surface, because of that I'm having pain in my hand. There is a region in my brain in which hand is represented, and I immediately all the sensations go to this area, and I lift my hand. And I lift my hand. And this is called as the sensory homunculus, wherein the body is actually represented upside down. As you can see, the ankle, toes, knees, and everything, all of this lower limb comes first. Then I have the upper limb, and then I have head, neck, and face. Correct? See, this ulta representation is what is called as a sensory homunculus. Every part of my human body is represented in some part of human brain, which is responsible to take care of that region. If anything goes wrong in that region, immediately it is that one particular, suppose something goes wrong here, okay, and somewhere this area is represented somewhere at this part of the brain, there is immediate connection, and he is the boss for this area. That region where a particular said function is represented takes care of that particular region, and no other regions come and they give any inputs. If they want any inputs, they will ask. But if there is an area which is looking after knee, if there is an area which is looking after ankle and toes, they only look after knees, they only look after ankle and toes. Everything is segregated in human brain. Okay, there are separate pathways for sensory sensations. There are separate pathways, and in the sensations itself we have separate pathways for pain, temperature, crude touch, fine touch, vibration, proprioception. When it comes to motor areas, we have so many different pathways like pyramidal tract, corticopontine cerebellar tracts, olivary tracts. So there is a separate segregation for every single function in the brain, and all of this is represented in the cerebral cortex. Let us now try and understand how this representation is actually there in the brain. Okay, how this representation actually is there in this very complex and extremely fascinating structure called as brain. Okay, now let us look at the frontal lobe and its cortical regions. In the frontal lobe, I have primary motor cortex, which is my Brodmann's area 4. Brodmann's area will be taught in much detail in your physiology classes. Okay, then where is this primary motor cortex present? It is present in the precentral gyrus. Why I kept telling about precentral gyrus back then, guys? Because precentral gyrus is the primary motor cortex, and which is Brodmann area 4. It controls all voluntary movements on the contralateral side of the body. Okay, it is the site where all the movements of various parts of the body are initiated, and also it receives the sensory inputs from the same parts of the body. Okay, if this is the frontal lobe and this is the central sulcus, this is the precentral area, precentral gyrus, where I have the precentral gyrus, which is the Brodmann area 4 motor cortex, primary motor cortex. Okay, so this is the central sulcus, and here is the motor or precentral gyrus. This is a highly magnified image, guys. Number 4 is the Brodmann area, and what is the function of the Brodmann area? It is the motor cortex or precentral gyrus. Very, very important, guys. Very important area. Okay, yes. As you can see, central sulcus, this is where the premotor cortex is. Very important for your examination also. This usually what they do is, in the specimen, they'll usually tie a pin or something here, and they'll ask you to identify this area. First, always, guys, if this is the cerebrum, identify the central cortex, central sulcus. The area next to the central sulcus is my premotor cortex. Okay, yes. We'll come to Broca's area and all of this later. Okay, next we have the secondary motor area, which is Brodmann area 6, 8, 44, and 45. And also we have precentral gyrus superior in the inferior, middle, and frontal gyri. All of this programs the activity of the TMA. Okay, stronger stimulation is required to produce the same degree of movement if I'm talking about these other secondary motor areas. Then we have a very important area called as the Broca's area. Broca's area is actually the sensory area for speech. Okay, what do I mean? Sensory area for speech. That means before speaking, I need to try and understand. Okay, I need to try and understand what exactly somebody else is speaking. Okay, whenever there is an injury to Broca's area, this results in inability to comprehend the speech. Correct? Understanding? Whenever there's the sensory area for speech where I cannot understand what somebody else is speaking. Speech comprehension will be lost here. Always guys, all of these important areas like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, all of this is located on the left frontal lobe. Here it brings about the formation of words. Whenever I cannot think and I cannot comprehend, correct? How do we speak, right? Before speaking, what do? We think. We think what to speak. We think what to speak, and then only we speak. Right? We think what to speak, and then only we speak. When this thinking is not happening, is not happening, I cannot speak only. Correct? When this thinking is only not happening, what will I speak? Some random bullshit. Correct? Some random things I'll speak. Instead of Broca's aphasia, I say Broca's, I had tea, coffee, something and all, I'll start speaking. This is such an important area, guys, which comes in the territory of middle MCA. It comes in the territory of the MCA. So whenever there is an MCA stroke, Broca's area is affected. Because of this, I have all of these manifestation: inability to comprehend speech, and there is decreased motor inability to speak and form words. Okay, we'll be having difficulty to make a speech and form words. And where is this present? This is the Broca's area near the calcarine sulcus. So this is the calcarine sulcus, guys. This is the calcarine sulcus. This is the Broca's area. This is the precentral gyrus. All of these areas are very, very, very important for your exam. Then I have frontal eye fields in the frontal lobe, where I have the middle frontal gyrus, and voluntary eye movements and accommodation pathways are controlled here. Then I have the prefrontal cortex, 9, 10, 11, 12 area concerned with individual's personality. If this prefrontal cortex 9, 10, 11 areas are gone, the personality of an individual is gone. Sometimes, guys, if somebody performs a frontal lobectomy for some tumor or anything, you see a completely different person altogether. Correct? That person will be lost. His personality will be lost after those complex surgeries. So this prefrontal cortex is the one that determines an individual's personality, which is very, very important. If there is any injury to prefrontal cortex, person becomes extremely aggressive. They throw things, they are hysterically laughing. And if you talk to the attenders, they'll tell you this is not how my father was. This is a completely different person. We don't know who this person is. So all of the personality traits that we have, all of it is formed or controlled in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, next let's go to parietal lobe. Parietal lobe has the primary sensory motor cortex number 1, 2, 3, which is the post-central gyrus, which is the site involved with processing of tactile and proprioceptive information. Okay, and I also have somatosensory association cortex 5, 7, but most important, guys, again I'm saying the most important one over here is the primary sensory motor cortex area 3 to 1 is the very, very, very important site, which is involved in the processing of all our tactile and proprioceptive informations. Okay. Next, I also have primary gustatory cortex, which is area number 43, which is in the inferior part of the post-central gyrus. Okay, let's just look at the different parts now, whatever we had studied. So again, guys, mark the central sulcus. Next to the central sulcus, in this area, right? In this area, what do I have? In this area, I have the pre-central cortex, which is the primary motor area. Which is the primary motor area. Whereas the area that is present next to the central sulcus is the post-central gyrus, which is primary sensory area 312. Understanding how beautiful the creation is, guys. We have the central sulcus, and next to that we have primary motor, and we have post-central gyrus, which is the primary sensory area. After that, we have somatosensory association cortex and primary gustatory cortex. Okay, but these two areas are extremely important, which will be asked in your exams. Next, in the occipital cortex, mainly whenever I talk about occipital lobe, I usually talk about primary visual cortex because occipital lobe is concerned with vision. Okay, occipital lobe is concerned with vision, and this is the primary area which is responsible for vision, right? Visual association area. This is the primary visual cortex, a kutti area, no, very small area, guys. It's not a very big area, but this very small area is what is responsible for vision. Okay. Yes. Let's go to temporal lobe. In the temporal area, mainly I have the primary auditory cortex area number 41, 42. This area numbers are also important. Auditory cortex is 41, 42, mostly hidden in the lateral sulcus. No points in guessing, responsible for hearing. In the anterior part, it receives low frequency sounds, posterior part receives high frequency sounds, and secondary auditory cortex is number 22, which is responsible for interpretation of sound. As you can see, every single area has some function designated to that. Okay, yes. In the temporal area, we also have primary olfactory cortex, where there is sense of smell. And we have the most important, which is the Wernicke's area, which is present in the superior and middle temporal gyrus, which helps in understanding of speech. So if somebody has any problem with Wernicke's area, he cannot understand what somebody else is speaking. Okay, because he cannot understand what somebody else is speaking, his thought process, there is nothing wrong in his thought process. Let us say if he wants to drink water, he says, I want to drink water, because there is nothing wrong in his sensory area. Which was sensory area? Broca's was the sensory area. Broca's was the sensory area which was present in this is the calcarine sulcus. Here is the Broca's area present in the frontal lobe. Correct? There is nothing wrong in his Broca's area. That is why his sensory aspect of speech is normal. His sensory aspect of speech is completely normal in a guy who has Wernicke's aphasia. In Wernicke's aphasia, there is motor difficulty. That is, he cannot form words and sentences are not clearly understood for this guy, and then sentence formation may be inhibited. This is, he cannot, even though in his head, he knows what to say, but he cannot say it. So that is a problem in Wernicke's area. In sensory, in Broca's, in Broca's, let's say if there is a lesion in the Broca's area, the person cannot even understand what he is saying. He is not able to make up words and sentences properly. So he has jumbled up speech. So that is Broca's aphasia. Whereas in Wernicke's aphasia, he cannot understand the word. There is motor difficulty where sentence formation itself may be inhibited here. Okay. One is sensory, another is motor. All right. So here primary auditory cortex is hidden here in the lateral sulcus. Correct. And next we have the Wernicke's area, which is very important. So why do you think Wernicke's area is here? Near to the auditory cortex? Because we have to hear somebody else speaking also to understand what they are saying and to reply back to them. So here I have the Broca's area and here I have the Wernicke's area. Both of them are connected to one another, and this is the calcarine sulcus. Okay, this is very important. This is the primary auditory cortex, and this is the secondary, primary olfactory cortex, and this is the primary auditory cortex. Now, this is the overall brain map. A beautiful picture that shows the motor actions, sensory actions. You can see all motor actions and all sensory actions, and speech, talking basically. And this is the auditory, hearing basically. This is the Broca's area, and this is the Wernicke's and hearing area, auditory cortex. This is the language area, reading and writing, which is Wernicke's area, and this is the vision. See how beautifully every aspect of this is being controlled. Every aspect of our day-to-day life is being controlled. And what is this? This area is the prefrontal cortex, and this is the area that determines somebody's personality. Okay, this area is the personality area. Now, there's a concept of lateralization, guys, but I mean, if you look at the recent research, the concept of lateralization is obsolete. I mean, there is no such thing these days as left and right dominance, but there is still academic purposes, we have to say. But why do they say this? Is because there is so much of connections between the right and the left brain that is constantly happening. The concept of lateralization is being questioned these days if you read the recent journals and everything. But the 95% of the people have the dominant hemisphere, which is the left hemisphere, and as we know, left side controls the right side, so all of us are right handed. Now, blood supply, mainly, we've already done this, anterior and middle cerebral and posterior cerebral artery. Okay. Yes. Now, let's go to meninges. To summarize, guys, if this is my beautiful, beautiful brain, I have central sulcus. The one next to that is the premotor area. Behind that is the sensory area. I have the calcarine sulcus here. Sorry, I've drawn the diagram wrong. So this is a calcarine sulcus here. Calcarine sulcus. Here I have the Broca's area. Here I have the auditory area and the language area. Prefrontal cortex concerned with personality changes. Then I have the occipital lobe, which is concerned with vision. Okay. This is concerned with personality. This is premotor, sensory, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and this is the auditory area, and this is the Wernicke's area. And here we have the smell, that is olfactory area. So basically, you can see how every part of the body is actually represented and actually controlled. We have seen how body is represented in an upside down fashion, which is a sensory homunculus. Now let's go to meninges. Meninges means membrane. Plural is menins. Okay. Now, this meninges consists of fibroblast and collagen fibrils. Basically, meninges means I have 3 layers that envelop my entire brain and spinal cord. Okay. These 3 layers envelop my brain as well as my spinal cord. All right. Now, what are these 3 layers? First, outermost layer is the dura mater. Middle is the arachnoid. Below one is the pia mater. Right. Now, this is the diagram where I have if this is the bone, skull, I have the dura mater, subdural space, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. And this is the brain, as you can see. Several differences in the meninges of the brain and the spinal cord. Not very important for you guys, but just have a look at it. First is the amount of collagen is very different in different meningeal layers. Okay. And from the outermost layer of meninges, from inward, dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater, the main function is to protect the central nervous system. So this is skin, aponeurosis of the scalp, and then we have the periosteum, then the bone, and here from the meninges starts. First is the dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. Let's talk about dura. Dura means tough mother and hard and inflexible. Okay. Now it is the outermost part which is thick and durable, closest to skull and vertebrae. So dura mater, arachnoid, pia mater, and here is my brain. So pia mater is something that surrounds the brain. So dura is the outermost layer, and it is made of loosely arranged fibroelastic layer of cells, but middle region is mainly fibrous portion. Okay. Now, what is it characterized by? How do you know that I am actually looking at dura mater? Why is it important to study, guys? During neurosurgery, you should know what layer you are seeing at. As a neurosurgeon, you should know if you are looking at the dura or pia mater or arachnoid matter. So it is characterized by multiple interdigitating, like interlock like this, processes, and there is no extracellular collagen and there is significant extracellular space. Mainly the Dura has two layers, periosteal dura and meningeal dura. Why? Because periosteal dura, if this is dura matter, and here is the bone. So the one which is closer to the bone is the periosteal layer, and the one which is closer to other layers is the meningeal layer, meningeal dura. Now the dura creates two little folds or compartments known as fox and tentorium. Fox cerebri separates the right and left hemispheres of the brain, and tentorium cerebelli separates from the cerebrum from the cerebellum. What is the function? What is the function? Main function is protection of brain from displacement, right? If I jump, it should not happen ki my brain also jumps and it hits the the cranial cavity above, hits the periosteum above, and then it gets damaged. It should not happen. It should not hit the bone when I jump. Correct? What is preventing my brain from doing that? It is the dura matter. Okay. Now the fox cerebri separates two hemispheres. Cerebelli separates the lobes of cerebellum. Tentorium cerebelli separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. All right. Yes. So this is the fox cerebri and tentorium cerebelli. All right. I've already, we have done this, dural venous sinuses and this. Okay. Next, epidural space is a potential space between dura mater and the skull. There are two spaces, guys. One is the epidural space. If this is the dura mater and this is the skull, the one which is between dura mater and the skull is the epidural space. Okay. If there is any hemorrhage here, it is called as epidural hemorrhage, which is EDH. EDH hemorrhage, if you look at in the MRI, it looks like an idli shaped hemorrhage like this. Okay. It looks like an idli shaped hemorrhage like this. Right. Now, the subdural space is the potential space between dura mater and arachnoid. So what is this? This is my dura mater. Okay. Then the next layer of the meninges I have is the arachnoid matter. Between dura mater and the arachnoid matter, I have the subdural space. Okay, subdural space. Here, if at all there is any injury in the subdural space, it forms a concavo-convex hemorrhage like this. Now it is called as subdural hemorrhage, which is very common in elderly people. Okay, which is very common in elderly people. Recently, guys, Shri Sadhguruji, he went through a surgery in Apollo Hospital in Delhi because of this SDH only. Even a trivial trauma in elderly can cause SDH in them. Okay. Now the bleed will be very small, but as the bleed continues and continues, it forms a big clot and it can cause midline displacement. Okay. And this is the subdural space between dura mater and arachnoid matter. Now, which meningeal layer is outermost and toughest? Dura. Next, let's go to arachnoid matter. Arachnoid is the middle one. It is a middle thin spider web-like membrane. It refers to spider web-like appearance. Now, we have already spoken about arachnoid matter in quite a bit, about arachnoid granulations and arachnoid villi. I'm not going into details of it. And we've also spoken about the subarachnoid space, which lies between arachnoid and the pia mater, which is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And I've also told you how the arachnoid granulation actually acts as gates. Okay, how it actually acts as gates so that there is no accumulation of accumulation of CSF. All right. Yes. Finally, we have the pia mater. This is the innermost. Okay. The pia mater is the Latin word meaning tender mother or soft mother. Dura was the tough mother. It's very delicate and it's the innermost membrane. Okay. Now it is the meningeal membrane that firmly adheres to the surface of brain and the spinal cord. Now, pia mater is pierced by all the blood vessels to the brain and spinal cord and its capillaries that nourish the brain. All right. Now, unlike other layers, this tissue actually adheres closely to the brain, running down into the sulci and fissures of the cortex. Suppose if this is the cerebral hemisphere and if there is a gyri and sulci like this, pia mater also goes and comes out like this. Pia mater also surrounds all of this gyri and sulci like this. It also fuses with the ependema, which is the membranous lining of the ventricles, to form structures called as choroid plexus. So what anything ringing in your brain, guys? What is this ependymal cells? What is this ependymal structures that we have? These are the linings of the ventricle that produce the CSF, correct? And what is it called as? The ones that produce the CSF is called as choroid plexus. Then we have a term called as leptomeninges. Leptomeninges means, it's not a fancy term. It means that arachnoid and pia mater together is called as leptomeninges. That's it. Now let's look at the spaces. All right. So first is the subarachnoid space, SAH. Subarachnoid space is between the arachnoid and the pia mater, which is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. Now, I've already spoken about the epidural space and subdural space. Now, there is subpial space between the pia mater, which is separated from the glia limitans. Okay. Now, very simple things to learn over here, guys. This is the skull. If you imagine this is the skull. And let's say I'm talking about meninges here. So the first layer I have is the dura mater, correct? The second layer I have is the arachnoid mater. And the third layer I have is the pia mater. This much we all know, right? I hope we don't have any doubt when it comes to this, right? Now, if I have to talk about the spaces here, between the skull and the dura mater, what do I have? Epidural space, right? This is the epidural space. Between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, I have the subdural space. Between the arachnoid and the pia mater, I have the subarachnoid space. And this is the subpial space. And any injury can result in accumulation of blood across all these spaces. In epidural space, it is called as epidural hemorrhage. Subdural space, it is called as subdural hemorrhage. Subarachnoid space, it is called as subarachnoidal hemorrhage. Subarachnoidal hemorrhage is when there is, let's say, a rupture of any aneurysm, Berry's aneurysm, and so on. SDH is seen in elderly people. EDH is seen in all of the accidents mainly. Then we have the spinal dura mater, which is not very important for you guys. Spinal arachnoid and spinal dura mater. Let's just take some questions, and I've just included this for the sake of completion. But what you should know in this session is these spaces, dural spaces, are very, very important. And in the dura mater, you should know dural venous sinuses as well as dural venous sinuses and folds, especially falx cerebri and tentorium cerebelli. These are very, very important. Okay. And extensions also you should know, which we have already done. Let's take a simple question. Which meningeal layer is thin, delicate membrane that lies between dura and pia mater, contains blood vessels that supply nutrients to brain? No points in guessing. Arachnoid mater. Okay. Which meningeal layer do CSF circulate, providing buoyancy and the mechanical protection? Again, subarachnoid space is where the CSF continues. So in today's session, we did two things. Number one, we studied about how the different parts of the brains are represented in the cerebrum and how it controls. And we also finished the meningeal layers and the spaces between the meningeal layers, which are important. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for being with us until now. And if you have any doubts, you can definitely, follow us across the social media handles and get in touch with us if you want to know more about the program and more about the topics that we have covered. And I wish you all the very best. Keep studying, and I'm sure you all pass with flying colors. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Good night.